Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, June the 17th, 2021. Just a reminder that in approximately 90 minutes, it'll be Clear Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about Kent Jones' documentary, Hitchcock Truffaut. But I'm going to begin today by talking about heroes or heroines of suffering. Not all that long ago, people became heroes or heroines because they had triumphed over adversity. Today, people become heroes or heroines because they have succumbed to adversity. Let me tell you about my sad life. And my sad life is because I am suffering from something called mental illness. It's not problems in living that I might have. It's not all the vicissitudes that everyone suffers through in life. No, this is a terrible condition that I've been afflicted with, which means I can't achieve anything. So you must acclaim me. There's a story, Charlotte Daly in the Daily Mail. Naomi Osaka has withdrawn from Wimbledon to, quote, take some personal time with friends and family, unquote. Osaka had previously suggested that she would take some time away from the game after withdrawing from the French Open due to mental health issues in the wake of criticism for her media boycott in Paris. The world number 2 has now confirmed her decision to skip Wimbledon, which starts on June 28th, but insists she will be ready for the Olympics in her homeland of Japan. A statement from her team read, Naomi won't be playing Wimbledon this year. She is taking some personal time with friends and family. She'll be ready for the Olympics and is excited to play in front of her home fans. Osaka will extend her break from professional tennis, having recently withdrawn from the French Open in a blow to Wimbledon organizers. Osaka made the decision to step away from the sport after finding herself at the center of a row at the tournament in France, where she was threatened with expulsion if she did not renege on her decision to boycott the media. So, what do we have here? We have a young woman in the peak of, well, at least physical health, who made a very swift rise to near the top of the women's tennis world. And she decided she didn't want to speak to reporters after her matches where she would be pummeled with softball questions from people who essentially worship her. It was all too much for her. And now she's not going to play Wimbledon either. Wimbledon being the most preeminent of the 4 Grand Slam tournaments. Osaka was threatened with expulsion from Roland Garros and any future slams if she continued to boycott the media. She would also be handed a fine of more than £10,000 if she refused to change her mind. Tournament organizer Jamie Baker said it is absolutely clear that we are here. We are completely open for any discussions when they want to have that. Look, it goes without saying that we want the best players to compete here no matter what. Rafael Nadal also pulled out of Wimbledon today as he cited his body as a reason to take extra care at the age of 35. The Spaniard, who has announced he will play no part at the Olympics, said in a statement, the fact that there have only been 2 weeks between Roland Garros and Wimbledon didn't make it easier on my body to recuperate after the always demanding clay court session. The goal is to prolong my career and continue to do what makes me happy. As opposed to Osaka, whose goal apparently is to end her career and continue to do things that make her unhappy. Who is behind all this? One of my correspondents suggests that this is Nike. Yes, they already have Colin Kaepernick, who is famous for, well, not playing. Oh, well, why wasn't he given a contract? Because his quarterback rating was 52 in his last season. Someone called Darren Rovell Business of sports betting, memorabilia, NFTs. Ooh, we're all into NFTs now, even though nobody knows what they are. Sports business reporter and senior executive producer for Action Network HQ. He commented, "Mark my words, in 20 years, Naomi Osaka will be known as the person who finally got the masses to understand that there is no difference between physical health and mental health. What she is doing here by withdrawing from Wimbledon is more than she could ever win on the court." The suggestion here is that Naomi Osaka is going to become a Prince Harry, Meghan Mertz of the sporting world. There is an enormous difference between mental health and physical health because physical illness can be measured and mental illness is a metaphor. It cannot be measured. We have no way of knowing how real it is. But yes, and we're going to hear a lot more about the stigma against talking about suffering from mental illness, whereas the exact opposite is true. Who isn't talking about mental illness and how much they have suffered? My correspondent says, with regard to Rovell, what a simp. How about she never play tennis again? That will really show how great she is and mentally tough. Also shows Nike is bankrolling and approving this. The branding of a cause is more lucrative than actually playing, competing, and winning. In a normal sponsorship, they would fine her or sue her if she just didn't compete at the premier event in tennis. They would drop her, etc. Most contracts are structured with incentives on how well she does if reaches finals, wins, etc. This gets to, and these next comments really get to the point from my correspondent. What Darren Rovell doesn't get is that not everyone is entitled to be a champion. A quarterback can't be great if he sits out the Super Bowl for mental health reasons. Not being physically or mentally injured are necessary to champions, or the ability to stay healthy is necessary to be great. If you always get hurt in pro football, you can never be great. But greatness has been redefined. Greatness is not about achieving, because apparently anyone can achieve, which is actually not true. The reason that sports stars are admired and paid so well in their salaries, winnings, and for their contracts is because people understand how difficult it is to get to the top level and to succeed there. Do you think that Christian Laettner wasn't suffering from anxiety, say? There was no pressure on him when he hit that final shot at the buzzer to win the NCAA final. One could give many such examples. Football players and baseball players play to an enormous racket from fans, when fans are allowed in the stadium. Often people shouting insults, abuse, whereas in tennis, the fans have all been persuaded to remain stock still and silent while the play is on. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Roulette Crack, to Dan and Dan Allison, Palpicasso 88, Dawn from Beyond, Contra Coup, Pitsky, Star Rover, who comments, tennis officials have not let Naomi Osaka's tail wag the dog. Chogokin666 says, this is why I wear Fred Perry. Roulette Crack says, mental toughness is what defines a champion. Steve says, let Kevin be our Virgil on the nightly descent to Infernal. Hello to Emma Nimpton. Hello to Clown Velt. Thank you for your kind words. Yes, Greg Norman. Greg Norman, the Australian golfer. I guess he's not really considered in the top rank historically because he lacked the mental toughness. He choked a great many times. He won 20 PGA tournaments and 2 majors, But everyone thought that that Greg Norman was going to win certainly over 10, maybe 20, you know. But golf is an exceedingly nerve-wracking game. I mean, if you make a bad play in tennis, you're going to lose a point. If you make a bad shot in golf, uh, you could be off the leaderboard just like that. Obviously, tennis or any sport at the highest level is intense. But once again, this is why we admire these people for their perseverance. It was ABC Sports who, in the 1970s, who came up with a new way of reporting it. Yes, 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 there are the actual events where the winners and the losers. But what about the struggles? What about the personal struggles of the athletes? And oh, yes, this athlete's mother or father died in an early age, or there was some other crippling pain in the family. It's been explained to me that this was a very clever way to get women to pay more attention to Olympic sports, because they want the personal stories. But this has gotten completely out of hand in recent years. I want to see the contest. I want to see who wins, who loses. I want to see the surprises. A strange thing about Naomi Osaka is that women's tennis does not have a very deep bench, which is why a handful of women have dominated women's tennis for the last 60 years or so. Men's tennis is much more competitive. Osaka was tipped for the top. She's pretty much there, and she would have dominated women's tennis for 5 or 10 years. But instead, it seems to have been put to her that it would be better for her just to step aside before she reaches the top. William Hicks says, just watch the 1986 game between Redskins and 49ers, Montana's second game after back surgery. Talk about psychological challenges. Star Rover says an argument for Novak Djokovic being the GOAT is because of his mental toughness. North Dallas 40 for Theater Thursday. I will think about that. Metal Mike says, are blood clots and other serious health issues resulting from the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines underreported? It seems that way. Let's talk about, oh yes, greatest of all time, Olympic gymnast Simone Biles says that she added bedazzled goats to her leotards to hit back at the haters because it would make them so angry. Are there a lot of people who hate Simone Biles? I rather doubt that. Of course, all famous people receive abuse, people who are jealous or envious or just not quite right in the head. But we're hearing a lot from this woman on the same subject. You know, why don't they talk about her greatness in her sport rather than her suffering? She said in an interview, that's my problem. When people kind of harp on other people that are good at something, and it's like everybody can say you're good, but once you acknowledge it, it's not cool anymore. And I want kids to learn that, yes, it's okay to acknowledge that you're good or even great at something. Oh, athletes are modest now? Athletes have not been modest for a very long time. In the interview, Biles also opened up about her mental health struggles, about which she has been quite candid recently. People think we're just athletes and entertainers, but we're also humans. Yes, I think this was generally understood. And we go through our own issues that you guys might not be able to see. Well, if you're a gymnast, you are constantly suffering from injury, constantly, because gymnastics is not a natural activity at all. I feel like most of the expectations that are on me are from myself, she added. Is that unusual? People pushing themselves to the top? requires a lot of egotism. I've tried not to let anybody else's expectations impact how I go into a meet or my mindset. I still do the sport because I find joy and it's what I love. I love to entertain, I love to compete, and I love to train. Although some days are harder than others, I've been doing it for so long, so I know exactly how I'm going to be going into the gym each and every day and all of that stuff. There is nothing new or novel or anything like that in what she has to say. Biles covers Glamour magazine this month in a white David Coma dress with a cutout to show off her perfectly toned midsection and red, white, and blue Tiffany Rose hair ties woven through an extra long braid. Though she's the picture of contentment on the cover, the star admitted to the magazine that, like so many people, she went through a rough patch in the spring of 2020. When her gym closed and the Olympics was canceled, she considered giving up this sport altogether. Oh, I see. In a time when millions of people are dying from a disease which we were told what threatened humanity itself, Simone Biles reached a personal low when the Olympics was canceled. Okay. Here's another hero of suffering. I mentioned her yesterday. Her name is Annamie Paul, and she is the leader of Canada's Green Party. And she is doubling down ferociously. So racist, so sexist, Annamie Paul slams bid to oust her as Green Party leader. There's something about this woman that I didn't mention yesterday, which I should have. As far as non-whites being political leaders in Canada, I don't really think it's much of an issue anymore. It became an issue for Jagmeet Singh. Well, I guess because he used to be called Jimmy Dhaliwal and then decided that wasn't Sikh enough, changed it to Jagmeet Singh. He observes the 7Ks and the turbans, which are very flamboyant, and he is always baring his teeth. With the turban and the long, scraggly beard and the teeth like fangs, he looks like a cartoon villain. I suggested at the time of his election as NDP leader that this was not going to be good for the party because the way he looks puts people off. I don't think that would be much of a problem for a black woman leading a political party in Canada, but Annamie Paul has a shaved head. Why does she shave her head? This is something that puts people off. It makes them uneasy. But of course, all of Annamie Paul's problems, despite her meteoric rise in Canadian politics, it's all because she is a black person and a woman, whereas the evidence is all actually in the other direction. If you look at this person, up on Wikipedia, you find out that she is a master of the NGO. Let's see, she is the founder and executive director of the Canadian Centre for Political Leadership from 2001 to 2005, something you've never heard of, and has worked in civic engagement and international affairs positions, including in political affairs at Canada's mission to the European Union and in the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. She is the co-founder of the Barcelona International Public Policy Hub. Yes, no political experience, except, being a co-campaign chairman for a leading candidate for the Ontario leadership. And why was she picked despite her complete lack of political experience? Because she was a black woman. There's no question about that. Just to be brief, one of the Green Party's 3 MPs doesn't like Israel very much, in support of the Palestinians. Annamie Paul, who was Jewish, made a statement about can't we all get along, the violence must stop, and she was attacked by this MP for being insufficiently pro-Palestinian. whereupon her spokesman delivered a rather ferocious attack on the MP, which is something, the backroom boys, they don't get into it, okay? They don't make the decisions. This was a very, very foolish thing to have done, and it pushed the MP from New Brunswick into the Liberal Party. Now, political parties are always looking to poach MPs from other parties. The Liberal Party did this several times when Paul Martin was prime minister in a desperate bid to keep Stephen Harper from becoming a prime minister. This is how the game is played. But according to Annamie Paul and her simps, the real villain in this shit show is Justin Trudeau. Yes. So a woman fails at leadership and then blames her failure on a man, a typical female logic. And then the story gets even more baroque, even more bizarre. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is firing back at Green Party leader Annamie Paul, stating she is not a token after being accused of serving as a female shield to the prime minister. I am not a token, nor would I ever accuse another woman politician of being some man's token. That is not how a feminist treats another woman. I'm a proud feminist who serves in a feminist government with a feminist prime minister. Freeland, Paul had claimed, had a hand in former Green MP Jenica Atwin crossing the floor to the Liberals, something she said was part of a pattern from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of, quote, undermining strong women, capable women at the height of their careers, and of pushing strong, competent, capable women out of politics, unquote. Trudeau, Paul alleged, does this to women with impunity. So I guess strong woman, strong, competent, capable women, Annamie Paul has demonstrated none of these things. No, none whatsoever. But what she is saying is that because she is Black and female, the normal cutthroat rules of politics do not apply to her, that she should be given a pass. Paul said in a radio interview, I'm also going to say shame on Chrystia Freeland for her complicity in this, for being his female shield against all of that. Freeland said, I make no apologies for having conversations with other women, with other mothers who work in elected politics, including Ms. Atwin. Supporting one another is important and certainly not shameful. I am a liberal, and of course, I always will be glad to encourage leaders who work hard to serve their communities to join our team. This is just so very embarrassing. Here's another simp, a female one, called Sabrina Mado in the National Post. Green Party leader Annamie's press conference Wednesday afternoon can be summed up in 2 words, shots fired. Paul minced no words as she eviscerated Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for his fake, self-serving brand of feminism. There was no ambiguity in her message. Paul is mad as hell and she's not going to take it anymore. Really? You wrote that? A sentiment that should be shared by women across Canada. To the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I say to you today, you are no ally and you are no feminist. Your deeds and your words over the past weeks prove that definitively. A real ally and feminist doesn't end their commitment to those principles whenever they come up against their personal ambition. No, so Justin Trudeau obviously should have passed on the opportunity to strengthen his party's position in the House of Commons and to strengthen his electoral prospects in an election which may be called any day now. No. A feminist ally would not do that. Mado continues, she's right, of course. There are few, if any, Canadian politicians with such a strong track record of steamrolling female colleagues. Sure, he appoints some of them to lofty positions, but putting women in high-profile positions only to publicly undermine their competence and political abilities in the pursuit of saving one's own ass isn't just not feminist. It actively undermines women. Worse, It chases some of the nation's best and brightest female voices out of the political sphere entirely. And there is a laundry list of Trudeau's interactions with Jane Philpott, Selena César-Chavins, who is just plain loopy, and Jody Wilson-Raybould. The leader of a political party in Canada has enormous power. And for a cabinet minister or an MP to set herself up publicly as opposition to the leader of the party, especially the prime minister, is a suicidal course. But apparently these women don't understand how politics works. And there's a piece by Michael Harris on the Tyee, tears, anger, regret, tears. There's no crying in politics. Inside the Green, implosion. And there's a lot of charges made against this woman, Annamie Paul. One damaging one. She supposedly demanded a salary as leader of the Green Party equivalent to that which an MP earns. And again, this accomplishment, hoovering up NGO money for 20 years while leaving no record of one's achievement does not strike me as being noteworthy, not in the slightest. Let's see. Metal Mike says it's absurd, but part of me feels that Trudeau deserves to reap the effects of the woke BS he sowed. Yes, of course. I feel exactly the same way. I have no love for Justin Trudeau or for Chrystia Freeland, although Chrystia Freeland actually did demonstrate achievement in her life before politics, unlike Justin Trudeau. Isn't Grace Jones the leader of the Greens, says Metal Mike. Grace Jones, of course, had very short hair, very stylized. I think she pulled it off. Clownvelt, what do you make of the idea of a post-liberal era Pache Deneen, who recently wrote Why Liberalism Failed? Well, I've been saying on this show for quite some time that liberalism is finished, that we are living in a post-liberal age, that who are the remaining liberals? What the people who write for Quillette say? And, they're appealing to logic and reason and all that good stuff and fairness. And that's all over. Politics has become emotional again. Dan Ellison says Camille Paglia and Ann Coulter are the only well-known women who have anything to say that matters. Well, I certainly wouldn't say that. Oh, Clownvelt says, also shocked to hear no mention of the sensational Velcro trousers of Roger Federer, which were whipped off with such elan. Star Rover says it would have been impossible for Western civilization to be created if women had been in positions of power in the past. I think that's largely true. My feelings are hurt. Oh, your feelings are hurt? What do you want me to do about it? Didn't you understand that in politics, people's feelings get hurt all the time? Actually, in any kind of stressful job, people's feelings get hurt all the time. But no, you're not allowed to hurt my feelings. And you have to listen now to my hurt. They don't want equality, they want license, says Chogokin 666. This is probably a trite to even say. Yeah, it is trite, but it is true. Absolutely. Jim Smith says women just can't win. Shave your head, too little hair. Don't shave your underarms too much. Oh, women complain that so much attention is paid to their appearance. And I think, just stop. Do you know how many millions of words, how many pictures, how many insults, how many memes devoted to Donald Trump's appearance, or to Bill Clinton's, for that matter? There was a Prime Minister of Canada called Joe Clark, He was prime minister for 9 months because he couldn't count. And Joe Clark, who's still alive, he's not an attractive man. And he was regularly ridiculed for his looks. He changed the parting of his hair, and he was ridiculed for that. Preston Manning, leader of the Reform Party in the Canadian Alliance, was ridiculed for his glasses, for his supposedly hick dress sense, etc., etc., etc. There's an enormous amount of attention paid to the looks of male politicians. Jagmeet Singh. KMG, are you excited that Canada finally has a Muslim Supreme Court justice? I'm over the moon, as they say in England. Okay, and let's move on to talk about Victoria's Secret. I suppose I know as much about Victoria's Secret as, any man would know. The brand got to be enormously lucrative for pushing their angels, kind of third generation supermodels, and they've decided they're not going to follow that path any longer because it's not diverse enough, which is a very serious category error. We want models to look more like women do today. Is that really such a good idea? The fashion industry, modeling, it's about idealism more than anything else. Why not just drag in a bunch of people off the street? Yes, women may not look like Victoria's Secret models, but they aspire to do so. And they will often, buy lingerie which is not appropriate for them. That's how you sell this stuff. This is by Monica Showalter in American Thinker. Victoria's Secret is going woke. No, not in the most obvious sense. What it's doing is scrapping its long-built brand of sexy underwear on super thin supermodels and exchanging it for underwear displayed on fat models, transgender models, lesbian models, tattooed models, people whose taste and presentation in sexy is not quite the same as it was in the past, expecting the public to buy it, like it or not. They're going virtuous. They're going inclusive. Well, yes. There's no question that collectively we are far uglier than we were, 50, 40, 30, 20, even 10 years ago. And, well, fashion has to reflect that. Does it? I don't think so. According to the New York Times, they will be spearheading what may be the most extreme and unabashed attempt at brand turnaround in recent memory, an effort to redefine the version of sexy that Victoria's Secret represents and sells to the masses. For decades, Victoria's Secret's scantily clad supermodels with Jessica Rabbit curves epitomized a certain widely accepted stereotype of femininity. Yes, apparently having breasts is merely a widely accepted stereotype of femininity. Now, with that kind of imagery out of step with the broader culture, yes, because men have decided they don't like good-looking women with good figures anymore. This is what the New York Times would have us believe. And Victoria's Secret facing increased competition and internal turmoil, the company wants to become, its chief executive said, a leading global advocate for female empowerment. Yes, I bought overpriced, shoddily made underwear, and this empowers me as a woman. Showalter comments, oh really? As recently as 2018, they resisted that. There was a groveling apology. Now they're going all in. What could be behind it? The spectacular U-turn. Yes, it is a trend in fashion, definitely a trend with the youth. So arguably, it's safe to say the company is following the herd and keeping up with the trends to try to make more money. Just take a look at the kind of models seen on Uniqlo, Banana Republic, Abercrombie & Fitch, Bonobos, Savage X Fenty, and other mall fixtures, as well as Dove soap, and in trendy catalogs such as Poetry, North Face, Duluth, or Nike. not to mention high fashion. It's not quite the wholesome, could care less outdoorsy look of Land's End, LL Bean, or Orvis. It's definitely an androgynous glamour look, contrived as heck, and in most cases, openly woke and scolding. This is one thing if you're the best in the business is that. It's probably quite another if you cultivated a huge business based on another kind of customer, someone who wants the classically sexy look of Victoria's Secret, often to catch a man. Yes, models aren't what they were. They are thinner, bonier, and stranger looking than they were, say, in the 80s and 90s, which was these were the glory decades of supermodels. I'm looking at this woman called Alessandra Ambrosio. There's a story in the Mail today about her. AA 40 proves she does not age as she flashes her impressive abs while in a frilly bikini after kissing new beau Richard Lee. This is no question a strange looking woman. Strange looking woman. But this is part. Victoria's Secret has not been immune to changing ideas of what constitutes a female beauty. According to the Times, while it was probably time for the angels to go, the lingerie powerhouse will have to strike a balance between moving forward and maintaining existing customers, said Cynthia Fettis Fields, the former chief executive of the Victoria's Secret division responsible for its catalog. If it was a $7 billion business pre-COVID, and much of that $7 billion was built on this blatantly sexy approach, be careful with what you're doing, she said. And that's not what they're doing. They're going all out to join the Church of Woe. And already they aren't very good at it. Victoria's Secret's new top model, Megan Rapinoe, a lesbian soccer star who's done a hell of a lot of modeling elsewhere and seems to like it better than soccer, is their new face and corporate consultant on content. According to W Magazine, Rapinoe said, "Any chance I get to do something outside of sport, particularly in fashion, I'm all over that, particularly in the context of women's sports, where I feel we're very boxed in." Because you don't make as much as the male players, because only lesbians are interested in women's soccer. Yet she doesn't project the inclusiveness as she's been billed as projecting, given that she's been caught making a racial slur targeting Asians in way back 2011 when she was 25. Some leftists are already calling to cancel her for that. She said that another woman with her eyes closed looked Asian. Yeah, pretty shocking, huh? I mean, there's nothing there, but apparently the word Asian was used, and she is not Asian. I really do not like Megan Rapinoe, but, there are new rules now. Let's see. Those who think the male gaze is objectionable won't be having descendants, according to Sarah Hoyt. If the new plan is to appeal to butch lesbians, that's silly. By calling their new models the VS Collective, they clearly want to appeal to communist butch lesbians. I don't think they've thought this through, though. There's no way to put a Mao collar on a pair of panties. Yes, I was struck by that. When CoverGirl decided to hire two famous lesbians, Queen Latifah and Ellen, to be models, I thought, how much makeup do lesbians buy? And how much high-end or expensive underwear do lesbians buy? Oh, yes, the lipstick lesbians who constitute, 5-10% of that tribe? Now, here we get to the twist in this story from American Thinker. Jeffrey Epstein. It was Les Wexner who owned or controlled Victoria's Secret and made it the tremendous success story it was. But Les Wexner was, how would I say, he was the fellow who pretty much gave us Jeff Epstein. Had a very close relationship indeed, and it's been rumored that Epstein acted as a procurer for Wexner for young men. And I'm really wondering about this. This is fascinating because, of course, one of the rumors which has attended upon the Victoria's Secret models for years and years and years is that they are yachters. That is to say, essentially high-end prostitutes. No one is going to Megan Rapinoe. But I'm looking at a story here about Megan Rapinoe, where we see her modeling, for W magazine, I think it is. And she is wearing, she's photographed on the beach, and she's wearing a close-fitting white t-shirt and a pair of white trousers. And it's a nice summer look. Only the trousers have extensive holes in them. And this irritates me more than I can properly express. We hear a lot about cultural appropriation. Why are millionaire women, or women worth hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion, going around in torn clothing? Oh, because they think it makes them look punk. Or just, oh, I'm a normal person just like you. Well, a normal person doesn't wear torn clothing if she or he can afford clothing that isn't torn. The torn clothing meme began with the punk group The Ramones on the cover of their first album released in 1976 called Ramones. And there they are in black leather jackets and in torn jeans. The torn jeans are a signifier, and what they signified is we are poor. It enrages me to see rich people adopting the garb of poor people. Oh, yes, we're just ordinary people, just like you, despite our vast wealth and millions of admirers. Here's a story from David Eng at Breitbart. And of course, the fashion industry they've embraced ugliness in a moral inversion, and the media has embraced ugliness. Oh, here's another sexy snip of Lizzo bearing almost everything. No, don't do that. This is not attractive. I suppose there are a handful of fetishists who find this attractive, but no one else does. How about drag queens? Are they attractive? Well, let's make a show called RuPaul's Drag Race, and we will meme the world into thinking that everybody loves drag queens. And everyone has to benefit from their wisdom, from their lived experience, especially now children. Disney Plus will hold an Alphabet People Pride concert aimed at kids and starring drag queen Nina West with performances of popular Disney songs that will reportedly be reimagined with Alphabet People themes. Disney Plus's This Is Me Pride Celebration Spectacular, which is set to stream on YouTube and Facebook on June 27th, will feature appearances by Kermit the Frog, as well as pop stars Haley Kiyoko and Todrick Hall. Other performances will include gender-fluid singer Alex Newell and gender non-binary performer Jesse James Keitel. Drag queen Jackie Cox is also set to appear during the concert. Both West and Cox are alumni of RuPaul's Drag Race. Alumni. Golly, that sounds kind of heteronormative, does it not? The virtual concert will feature performances of notable Disney tunes reinterpreted through an Alphabet People lens, according to a report from Deadline. It remains unclear which songs will be featured in the concert. Of course, Disney has a vast trove of intellectual property, much of it coming from the actual Walt and Roy Disney days, which people continue to associate with wholesome Americanness. Disney is taking a very bold step here because they are taking their almost invaluable intellectual property and they are associating it with sexual depravity and the grooming of children. Well, Disney is a company that can't fall apart soon enough for my liking. And let's go back to the chat. Okay. Ran into a Muslim couple from the Gulf, very polite, quiet, and serene, says Birkin Sultanov. John S. says inverted morality as well. Clownvelt says contemporary ethics and aesthetics can be understood as the inversion of reality. Yes, that's the argument made by the Hungarian philosopher Mikhail Polanyi. Are there no attractive heavy girls? Says Chogokin666. I know there are because I follow some bombshells on Instagram. So why these slovenly oddies? Well, I suppose it depends on what you mean by heavy. By traditional model standards, Billie Eilish is a heavy woman, but she is an attractive woman in her, in her latest iteration. She is not, deliberately gross like Lizzo is. It's all the fault of Putin, says Birkin Sultanov. I had torn jeans as a metalhead back in high school, says Metal Mike. Rich people should dress like rich people. It's aspirational for poorer people. Boy, if I had that kind of money, I would be wearing Italian suits from a designer whose name ends in a vowel because I could afford it. But no, they want to look like everyone else. Of course, the casual clothes that rich people wear are not the casual clothes that poor people wear. And you can easily tell the difference. Roulette Crack says, I researched Megan Rapinoe. When she started all this woke crap, I noticed she was trying to launch some sports-related apparel business, which was getting zero traction. I remember being at work. This guy had designer stubble, tousled hair, faded shirt, etc. Must have cost $300. Another guy turns up who looks like crap. Hangover, smelly clothes. They looked the same. Victoria's new secret is that behind the giant-sized moo-moo, she's a heifer. Can't wait for the new catalog. Gamian says the most beautiful model is Adriana Lima. Old Navy has a separate section for gender-neutral clothes, says Gamian. Fat models, model clothes, and regular size section, in addition to plus size section. Irritating. Is it a reasonable question to ask what will replace liberalism? Says Clownvelt. Bonapartism, as James Burnham says. Our societies have become so scaled, so complicated, so fractious that I don't think the traditional politics can work. I mean, you can see this in the United States. I'll be talking about this a little later. The absolute ferocious divide between one half of the country and the other. All right. Okay, let's move on to Hilaire Belloc. More from his 1912 book, The Servile State, and he's talking about possible reform of capitalism. He writes, the second type of socialist reformer may be dealt with more briefly. In him, the exploitation of man by man excites no indignation. Indeed, he is not of a type to which indignation or any other lively passion is familiar. Tables, statistics, an exact framework for life, these afford him the food that satisfies his moral appetite. The occupation most congenial to him is the running of men, as a machine is run. To such a man, the collectivist ideal particularly appeals. It is orderly in the extreme. All that human and organic complexity, which is the color of any vital society, offends him by its infinite differentiation. He is disturbed by multitudinous things and the prospect of a vast bureaucracy, wherein the whole of life shall be scheduled and appointed to certain simple schemes, deriving from the coordinate work of public clerks and marshaled by public heads of departments, gives his small stomach a final satisfaction. Now, this man, like the other, would prefer to begin with public property in capital and land, and upon that basis to erect the formal scheme which so suits his peculiar temperament. It need hardly be said that in his vision of a future society, he conceives of himself as the head of at least a department and possibly of the whole state, but that is by the by. But while he would prefer to begin with a collectivist scheme ready-made, he finds in practice that he cannot do so. He would have to confiscate just as the more hearty socialist would. And if that act is very difficult to the man burning at the sight of human wrongs, how much more difficult it is to a man impelled by no such motive force and directed by nothing more intense than mechanical appetite for regulation. He cannot confiscate or begin to confiscate. At the best, he will buy out the capitalist. Now, in his case, as in the case of the more human socialist, buying out is, as I shall show in its proper place, a system impossible of general application. But all those other things for which such a man cares much more than he does for the socialization of the means of production, tabulation, detailed administration of men, the coordination of many efforts under one schedule, the elimination of all private power to react against his department, all these are immediately obtainable without disturbing the existing arrangement of society. With him, precisely as with the other socialists, what he desires can be reached without any dispossession of the few existing possessors. He has but to secure the registration of the proletariat, next to ensure that neither they, in the exercise of their freedom, nor the employer in the exercise of his, can produce insufficiency or insecurity, and he is content. Let laws exist which make the proper housing, feeding, clothing, and recreation of the proletarian mass be incumbent upon the possessing class, and the observance of such rules be imposed by inspection and punishment upon those whom he pretends to benefit, and all that he really cares for will be achieved. To such a man, the servile state is hardly a thing towards which he drifts. It is rather a tolerable alternative to his ideal collectivist state, which alternative he is quite prepared to accept and regards favorably. Already the greater part of such reformers, who a generation ago would have called themselves socialists, are now less concerned with any scheme for socializing capital and land than with innumerable schemes actually existing, some of them possessing already the force of laws for regulating, running, and drilling the proletariat without trenching by an inch upon the privilege in implements, stores, and land enjoyed by the small capitalist class. The so-called socialist of this type has not fallen into the servile state by a miscalculation. He has fathered it, he welcomes its birth, he foresees his power over its future. So much for the socialist movement, which a generation ago proposed to transform our capitalist society into one where the community should be the universal owner and all men economically equal, free or unfree under its tutelage. Today, their ideal has failed, and one of the two sources whence their energy proceeded, the one is reluctantly, the other gladly acquiescent in the advent of a society which is not socialist at all, but servile. Of the practical reformer, there is another type of reformer, one who prides himself on not being a socialist, and one of the greatest weight today, he is also making for the servile state. This second factor in the change is the practical man, and this fool, on account of his great numbers and determining influence in the details of legislation, must be carefully examined. It is your practical man who says, whatever you theorists and doctrinaires may hold with regard to this proposal, which I support, though it may offend some abstract dogma of yours, yet in practice, you must admit that it does good. If you had practical experience in the misery of the Jones family, or had done practical work yourself in Pudsey, you would have seen that a practical man, etc. It is not difficult to discern that the practical man in social reform is exactly the same animal as the practical man in every other department of human energy, and may be discovered suffering from the same twin disabilities which stamp the practical man wherever found. These twin disabilities are an inability to find his own first principles and an inability to follow the consequences proceeding from his own action. Both these disabilities proceed from one simple and deplorable form of impotence, the inability to think. I give an example of this as the institution of the welfare state. The welfare state, no question, helped people. It kept people from destitution. But the practical men who gave us the welfare state gave little thought to the consequences of it. One of which being that in North America, people who call themselves conservatives still carry on about freedom, as if freedom is what the mass of people want. Well, because of the welfare state, the mass of people, the proletariat, as Belloc would have it, are incapable of exercising freedom because they have become utterly beholden to government for their very survival. Belloc continues, let us help the practical man in his weakness and do a little thinking for him. As a social reformer, he has, of course, though he does not know it, first principles and dogmas like all the rest of us. And his first principles and dogmas are exactly the same as those which his intellectual superiors hold in the matter of social reform. The two things intolerable to him as a decent citizen, though a very stupid human being, are insufficiency and insecurity. When he was working in the slums of Pudsey or raiding the proletarian Joneses from the secure base of Toynbee Hall, what shocked the worthy man most was unemployment and destitution, that is, insecurity and insufficiency in flesh and blood. Now, if the socialist who has thought out his case, whether as a mere organizer or as a man hungering and thirsting after justice, is led away from socialism and towards the servile state by the force of modern things in England, how much more easily do you not think the practical man will be conducted towards that same servile state, like any donkey to his grazing ground? To those dull and short-sighted eyes, the immediate solution, which even the beginnings of the servile state propose, are what a declivity is to a piece of brainless matter. The piece of brainless matter rolls down the declivity, and the practical man lollops from capitalism to the servile state with the same inevitable ease. Jones has not enough. If you give him something in charity, that something will soon be consumed, and then Jones will again not have enough. Jones has been 7 weeks out of work. If you get him work under our unorganized and wasteful system, etc., he may lose it just as he lost his first jobs. The slums of Pudsey, as the practical man knows by practical experience, are often unemployable. Then there are the ravages of drink. More fatal still, the dreadful habit mankind has of forming families and breeding children. The worthy fellow notes that as a practical matter of fact, such men do not work unless you make them. And I'll have more to say on this on tomorrow's show. And what do I want to talk about now? Yes, I want to talk about alternative realities in America. Here is something from Revolver News Official. That's the Gab account of revolver.news, which I highly recommend. Update, Twitter is in an absolute state of panic over Revolver News' report. And here's a reaction from Twitter, which, of course, Twitter is not a publisher. No. Because if it was a publisher, there would be certain rules, certain legislation it would have to abide by. No, Twitter is merely a platform. But this is what Twitter had to say yesterday. Trump supporters organized and attended the January 6th U.S. Capitol insurrection, according to the New York Times, Recode, and NBC. Many of the hundreds of people who have been arrested for participating in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol building were longtime supporters of former President Donald Trump, according to fact checkers and reporters, or anyone who looked at the people in front of the Capitol building with their Trump flags, their MAGA hats. Yes, but fact checkers have determined that many of these people were Trump supporters. That is some cutting edge analysis. Some of the people who participated in the attacks were named as unindicted co-conspirators in Capitol riot indictments, and according to legal experts, undercover agents cannot be named as unindicted co-conspirators. Oh, there's a handbook. There's a rule book. Is there? And what happens if you break these rules? Do you go to prison? Do you go to the gallows? Does anything happen to you? How did the FBI and the Department of Justice and the so-called intelligence community act during the Trump presidency, even before Trump was inaugurated? They acted as men and women who are plotting a coup. That is how they acted, and they lied, and they lied, and they lied again, including under oath. And what happened to them? Nothing. From Revolver News, Revolver's major investigation of the January 6th Capitol incident has sparked a gargantuan response from Congress and the press. First, the backstory. In a report published late Sunday night, Revolver explored the federal indictments against members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and found that the leading planners and provocateurs of the January 6th incursion weren't the individuals who have been publicly charged with crimes, but the unindicted persons who were present at the Capitol alongside them. Revolver's investigation raised disturbing possibilities. Would January 6th have happened without substantial agitation by federal law enforcement to make it happen? Did shadowy forces recognize the January 6th rally from the beginning as an opportunity to harm the Trump movement to take back America? Was the entire militia/white nationalist threat substantially a creation of federal law enforcement for the purpose of defaming and discrediting right-wing populism? Revolver has raised the questions, but it will take work by allies within the government to reveal the full truth. And thankfully, several lawmakers are already stepping up. Last Tuesday, in the wake of Revolver's investigation, Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida sent a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray demanding to know how many undercover federal agents and informants were present at the Capitol, what roles they played, and how many of them had infiltrated the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and 3%ers. Gaetz wasn't alone. In a hearing Tuesday afternoon, Representative Paul Gosar interrogated Director Wray about Revolver's findings and read its most recent article into the congressional record. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene demonstrated why so much of Washington despises her by joining the demand for answers as well. Revolver's investigation has prompted heavy coverage from the press as well. Glenn Greenwald, who I suppose is close to being the most hated man by progressives, he tweeted yesterday, "Liberals are apoplectic about these questions regarding advanced FBI infiltration of groups involved in the January 6th Capitol riot because liberals, as polls show, now revere the FBI and CIA and thus view any suggestion that they acted nefariously or deceitfully as weird and offensive." He continued, "I realize that Darren J. Beatty and Revolver News have been declared off limits, but read the reporting they did to judge for yourself on whether the questions of FBI infiltration are valid. They did vastly better January 6th reporting than most liberal outlets." I saw a movie yesterday, came out a few years ago, called American Hustle, which was quite entertaining. It's based somewhat loosely on the AB scandal. And 6 congressmen and 1 senator went to prison for this. The senator, I learned, was almost certainly not guilty of what he went to prison for. And the government knew that he was not guilty. And the whole Abscam affair is shameless behavior by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in attempting to entrap people. "Oh, I'm not interested in this," says the mayor of Camden, New Jersey. And someone literally runs out in the street, someone working for the FBI, a crook who's been suborned. "No, please, please, please take part in our scam. Won't you please, please? I want to be your friend. Take the suitcase. Take part in the scam." There is a very long history of the FBI in the United States engaging in this kind of shameless behavior. But the left, the progressives, have forgotten all about it. These are the same people who would go on and on at great length about Operation Phoenix and infiltrating the Black Panthers and the like. But no, now the FBI and even the CIA, which of course back in the 1970s was revealed to be a criminal organization by the Church Committee. No, progressives love the CIA now because the CIA is anti-Trump, and the CIA is anti-Trump because Trump took the position, as Nixon did before him, that you work for me, not the other way around. Here's a story from Pam Key at Breitbart. MSNBC's Chris Hayes, during Wednesday's broadcast of his show All In, complained that Fox News host Tucker Carlson was attempting to, quote, break the consensus of reality so that people can be manipulated and radicalized. The point of propaganda is to shape reality. It exists so that what is actually happening in the world can be ignored or overwritten, so that when you see what you see before your eyes can be waved away as an apparition. What we're seeing in the country, Hayes continued, is a sustained effort of concerted propaganda to destroy the civic terrain necessary to hold up democracy. Here is what that looks like in the wake of the January insurrection, when we all watched a mob violently overtake the Capitol, erecting a gallows, shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," and assaulting police officers left and right with the express purpose of overturning an election, doing so based on a false belief pumped in their heads by propagandists the election was stolen. For months now, they've been pumping people full of this story, this propaganda that the January 6th rioters were brave patriots, tread upon by the state, punished for dissent, not for a violent assault on the Capitol to overturn an election. What's going on in Portland? Ooh, no, not a violent assault on the city. No. It's protest, legitimate protest. Black Lives Matters and their allies burning, looting, killing last summer in America. Peaceful protests. Oh, what about the burning and the looting? What about and the smashing? Peaceful protests. Don't you understand? He's talking about propaganda, and he uses this word insurrection. Whatever you think of what happened in the Capitol on January 6th, this was clearly not an insurrection. A bunch of people entering a building. The doors had been opened. They would not have been able to break down those doors. Out of the question. Maybe a tank, maybe a tank's volley could open those doors. Short of that, no. And so they wander around. Some things are broken. A laptop is stolen, etc., etc. The authorities confiscated no guns from these people. And Trump told people to go home, and they went home. That is not an insurrection. But again and again and again, we are told that it is an insurrection. And of course, Tucker Carlson is asking questions. How much of this was a false flag operation, if any? Because there are serious indications in government documents, indictments, that much of it was a false flag operation. But no, Chris Hayes says it's crazy, crazy stuff. Does the United States have a history, the FBI say, the CIA, of engaging in false flag incidents? Yes, indeed they do. A long history. But no. That couldn't possibly have happened on January the 6th. And it's outrageous for people like Tucker Carlson to suggest that's possible. Here's something else from the regime media from Justin Baragona, who is contributing editor of the Daily Beast. Tucker Carlson bizarrely suggests Capitol insurrection was orchestrated by FBI. Oh, how about the bizarre suggestion that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Remember that conspiracy theory? That there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Oh, guess what? It turned out there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You know who went along with the lie? That there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that Saddam Hussein presented a clear and present danger to the United States, that he had something to do with 9/11. Almost the entire regime media went along with this. The Daily Beast writers are taking as January 6th denialism. Ooh, sounds kind of like Holocaust denialism, doesn't it? To another level, on Tuesday night, Fox News host Tucker Carlson suggested the Capitol insurrection was a false flag orchestrated by the FBI in an effort to suppress political dissent. The far-right Fox News star, far-right, yes, has rallied to the defense of the Capitol rioters, portraying them as largely peaceful protesters while raging against federal prosecutors for the hundreds of criminal charges filed in the wake of the insurrection. With more rioters still facing potential indictments, many have taken to cooperating with the feds to avoid or lessen jail time. You remember the riot in Washington, D.C. after Trump was elected? Remember all the damage there? What happened to these people? Nothing, essentially. The crime for which most of the people arrested for what happened on January 6th, sometimes weeks afterwards, was trespassing. Trespassing is generally not considered the sort of crime which leads to people being held in solitary confinement for months. After invoking Russian President Vladimir Putin's latest whataboutism argument about the Capitol riots, which featured Putin referencing Capitol rioter Ashley Babbitt's death to deflect answering a question about jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, Carlson declared that Putin raised fair questions. Well, he did raise fair questions. Alexei Navalny is not dead. Ashley Babbitt is dead. And of course, these progressives are being entirely hypocritical about Alexei Navalny, who is might be described as a far-right nationalist. But no, it is wicked, perhaps treasonous, to ask questions. Someone was asking me about liberalism, and yes, liberalism. Well, asking questions is a good thing, right? No, it's a bad thing, and it actually imperils democracy, no less. J.B. Shirk writes in The American Thinker, do you remember how conservatives went out of their way to separate rank-and-file FBI agents from the corrupt actions of Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, Bill Priestap, James Baker, James Rybicki, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and others as more evidence came to light, revealing that the top brass at the Bureau had worked to create an insurance policy that could be used to overthrow President Trump from office? Writers and television pundits would always couch any criticism of the Bureau in some respectful language like, we're only talking about high-ranking officials here, not the FBI itself, which is filled with the best agents in the world who are always looking out for America. Shirk comments, I think we can dispense with the overly protective pleasantries at this point. The FBI is a goon squad of un-American thugs who have taken the worst elements of East Germany's Stasi, police state, and Cosa Nostra's organized crime and turned them into a blueprint for exercising and keeping illegitimate power over their enemies. They aren't a law enforcement organization, and they certainly don't give a rat's rear end about justice. They're regime enforcers with badges. Shirk continues, if the stated reason for the FBI's inception was to pursue federal crimes that might otherwise be unenforced or overlooked in the interstate wilderness separating local jurisdictions, J. Edgar Hoover wasted no time turning the Bureau into a personal domestic intelligence force capable of intimidating political enemies and insulating him from potential removal through the use of blackmail. Before Jim Comey was secretly leaking to the press and using Hillary Clinton's Russian collusion dossier in an operation to take down President Trump, Mark Felt, the FBI's second in command at the time of the Watergate scandal, and the anonymous Deep Throat who made Woodward and Bernstein famous, actually succeeded in secretly bringing down President Nixon. In this way, the FBI has at least as much experience overthrowing American governments as it does any enemy state. You think it was sufficiently clear, Shirk continues, as evidence mounted over the last 5 years, that Comey and company had undertaken a mission with John Brennan at CIA, Bruce Orr at Maine Justice, Nellie Orr and Glenn Simpson at Fusion GPS, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, James Clapper, and Christopher Steele, the Russian hoax dossier author and former Russia desk head at Britain's MI6, to frame the sitting president of the United States as a Russian asset by repeatedly filing fraudulent FISA affidavits with America's Secret Surveillance Court, among other unprosecuted crimes, to spy on Donald Trump and associates. But there were also the efforts of Rod Rosenstein, Andrew Weissman, Robert Mueller, and their army of 50 FBI agents who spent 2 years trying to entrap President Trump on phony obstruction of justice charges during a bogus special counsel witch hunt. Yes, but everyone loves the FBI and CIA now. Well, I guess some people do. Yes. What is truth? Yes, said Pontius Pilate. This is Joshua Klein at Breitbart. The Republican Party's fight against the teaching of critical race theory in schools is akin to neo-Nazis in Germany seeking to revise history and put an end to Holocaust education, according to Jason Stanley, a professor of philosophy at Yale University. Appearing on MSNBC's The Mehdi Hasan show Tuesday night, the professor blasted Republican opposition to CRT. He said this tactic is the American version of an international tactic. It always goes with autocracy. Hassan comments, a philosopher, Jason Intrater, compares the weird GOP war on CRT with neo-Nazis in Germany trying to end Holocaust education and revise history. Well, first off, neo-Nazis have never held any power in Germany. Never. They have been banned from 1945. Political movements which could not fairly be described as neo-Nazi, they could be described as, I suppose, old-fashioned, have been routinely banned in Germany. And now we find that the leading right-wing opposition party is being surveilled by the German government, and the German government is admitting it. So this is a blatantly false comparison that he is making. What do we know about critical race theory? We know that it teaches hatred of white people. White people are racists. All white people are racist. This is what CRT attempts to teach us, that racism is incurable, that racism is like a mental illness, a psychosis, a disease which threatens the rest of the human race. This is what CRT teaches. And here we have a professor at Yale University talking about, how it's deranged to criticize or excoriate critical race theory. This is a battle they can't win. As others have pointed out, they went too far with this. They went too far because they're using exterminationist language routinely now, luxuriating in fantasies about, unloading a pistol in the heads of white people, that sort of thing, moving white people from the face of the earth. This is the kind of language which brings pushback. Couldn't they have figured that out beforehand? Well, people like this Yale professor is attempting to brazen it out. If we just keep repeating a lie often enough, all my friends at Yale and all my friends in the media, well, they all agree with me. So we're unstoppable. Well, fortunately, that is not the case. This is from the Daily Mail. Biden makes Juneteenth National Independence Day a federal holiday to remember the moral stain of slavery. And Kamala says, we must learn from our history and teach our children. Kamala doesn't have any children by choice, as it turns out. But perhaps all of America are her children. Of course, Juneteenth, all right, is not very many days away. It's 2 weeks away from Independence Day, the 4th of July. So essentially in America now, there is now a white national holiday and there is a black, or if you like, anti-white national holiday. Biden said at the White House signing ceremony, Juneteenth marks both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation and a promise of a brighter morning to come. This is a day of profound weight and profound power, a day in which we remember the moral stain and the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. Is it going to stain the country still? Terrible toll? What, in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? This is another thing that CRT teaches, that slavery is America's original sin. And it plays on a deliberate obfuscation of history. Apparently, it was only Americans who ever enslaved people, or as Hilaire Belloc points out in the Serval State, slavery is the default condition of humanity. It is not unique to America. In no way is it unique to America. Biden heralded the appearance at the White House of 94-year-old Opal Lee, a Texas-born woman known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, who single-handedly put the holiday on many Americans' radar. Few Americans, white or black, had even heard of Juneteenth until a year or two ago. But again, they construct their own reality. Oh, yes, Juneteenth, always been a tremendous American celebration. No, it hasn't. It hasn't. Biden said great nations don't ignore their most painful moments. They embrace them. Do they? Really? Great nations don't walk away. We come to terms with the mistakes we made, and remembering those moments, we begin to heal and grow stronger. So has all the wallowing in white America's guilt, has that begun a healing in America? Has that made America grow stronger? No, it hasn't. It has resulted in exactly the opposite effect. Biden said, folks, the promise of equality, I think he means equity, because black people are entirely equal under law, more than equal, if you consider affirmative action in the United States, is not going to be fulfilled until it becomes real in our schools and on our main streets and our neighborhoods. What does Joe Biden think is taught in America's schools and has been taught in America's schools for decades now? And it's not going to be fulfilled as long as the sacred right to vote remains under attack. Yes, apparently requiring some sort of proof to vote is an attack on the sacred right to vote. Oh, Usher was there at the White House. Very, very exciting. Ilhan Omar, looking somewhat distant, I suppose you could say, was also there. And, of course, you knew this was going to happen. Squad member Cori Bush now calls for reparations and black liberation after House votes to make Juneteenth a National Independence Day federal holiday, after 14 GOP reps said it forces Americans to pick between June 19th and July the 4th. It's Juneteenth and reparations. It's Juneteenth and end police violence and the war on drugs, she tweeted Wednesday night. She also pushed for the end of housing and education apartheid and teaching people the truth about white supremacy in our country. Yes, it's a funny kind of white supremacy that allows someone like Cori Bush to be elected to the House of Representatives and to lecture white people on their wickedness. Black liberation in its totality must be prioritized, as she wrote yesterday. It sounds more than a little threatening to me. What would constitute black liberation? Does anyone know? And in lovely Newark, New Jersey, a massive George Floyd statue has been erected at Newark City Hall. 800 pounds it is, because of celebrating George Floyd's achievements as what? No, well, he had no achievements, none whatsoever in his life. He was a career criminal and a violent one. But you see, in a way, he's the perfect choice, because it's all well and good to salute people who live decent lives, but if you can take a thug and make him a national hero and bully people into stating their adoration of such a fellow, well, that really proves who has the power, does it not? And in my own country, Ottawa should explore removing Mounties from communities, MPs suggest. The federal government should look at ending contract policing within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, fundamentally changing the National Police Service, as a landmark report by MPs. A transformative national effort is required to ensure that all Indigenous, Black, and other racialized people in Canada who racialized them, are not subject to the discrimination and injustice that is inherent in the system as it exists today, says the report from the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. The committee, made up of MPs from all four official political parties, has been studying the issue of systemic racism in policing since last June, spurred on by an international movement urging governments to rethink police budgets and use of force in the wake of George Floyd's death in police custody in the U.S. Yes, of course, George Floyd died in police custody in the well-known Canadian province of Minnesota. This would be an immense project, apart from Ontario and Quebec, which have provincial police forces, and of course, major cities which have their own police forces. The bulk of policing in Canada is done under contract by the RCMP. I don't know. Perhaps this is just a performative, but once again, it would appear what we have here is that Indians and Black people say that the RCMP is bad, so therefore we should remove them because these minorities have a veto power over what happens in my country. Yes, on the subject of freedom, this is from Kyle Olson of Breitbart. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is continuing a hardline approach to masks, making them a strict condition of obtaining services from her department. At a branch office in Muskegon, there are ample warnings on the door: no mask, no service. You must wear a face covering over your nose and mouth while you're in our office. You will be refused service without a mask or face covering. Benson's requirements are more strict than Governor Gretchen Whitmer's latest coronavirus order, which exempts fully vaccinated residents from wearing one and is aligned with CDC guidelines this state. Fully vaccinated people can resume activities without wearing a mask or physically distancing. Michigan, leading the way in America. Take a quick look at lockdown skeptics. Chris Whitty warns of summer and winter waves as Neil Ferguson raises prospect of new lockdowns. But data show the third ripple is already peaking. Well, it's clear that Chris Whitty and Professor Neil Ferguson want lockdowns forever. The latest argument, oh, yes, well, COVID may be dwindling away to nothing, but what about the common cold and influenza? Oh, you're going to eliminate them as well? Are you? And how are you doing that? Government considers making working from home default option. And there is a picture of a woman, presumably a mother, on a laptop with a child who looks to be about 2 years old. He appears to be playing with her mother's glasses. She's wearing a bathing suit, standing up in a chair while there's children's toys and children's food all over the table right up to the laptop. And I'm wondering how much work this woman is getting done. Again, in my own country, half the civil servants have not returned to work, which raises the question, why do they still have jobs? Why are they necessary? Why is Davos man so keen on lockdowns? Asks Toby Young. Well, it is because these 21st century robber barons are making money out of the pandemic. According to Robert Watts, who compiles the Sunday Times Rich List, more people have become billionaires in the past year than in any other time in Britain's history. The combined fortune of these masters of the universe has grown by more than a fifth, and the rest of the 1% haven't done too badly either, thanks to massive government expenditure. That's Neil Ferguson's argument. But Toby Young says, I don't think that's the whole of the story. I think it's also because being in favor of non-pharmaceutical interventions is a high status indicator, a way of advertising that you're in the same club as tech titans such as Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and eminent public health scientists like Anthony Fauci and Neil Ferguson. Luxury beliefs, they call them. Even in Ferguson's worst case scenario, the cost of saving one life from COVID is £1 million. And there's a list of the MPs in Britain who voted against the continuation of lockdown. Hairdresser and plumbers working care homes also face mandatory vaccination. AstraZeneca COVID vaccine recommended only for Australians aged 60 and over. Education Charity finds that school closures hampered students' learning. Didn't know you would need a study for that. Let's take a look at Alex Berenson's biography. And here we go. Yes, I mentioned the very sad story of 19-year-old Simone Scott, who died shortly after her second vaccination, Moderna vaccination. Let's see. Berenson writes, what? We can't have an emergency meeting to discuss why young adults are being hospitalized for post-vaccine heart inflammation because of a holiday that didn't officially exist until 2 hours ago. Black Lives Matter. Yes, the June 18th, 2021 COVID-19 meeting is being rescheduled due to the observation of the Juneteenth National Independence Day holiday. There's a quote here from Professor Gavin Yamey, MD, MPH. Oh, wonderful. The Great Barrington Declaration authors are back to tell us what a surprise not to vaccinate the young. These are the same folks who oppose mask, test, trace, distancing, school, workplace protections, and widespread vaccinations. Let's see. Berenson has a fact-check. Masks useless, lockdowns counterproductive, test and trace, ha, ha, ha. School protections, it's more dangerous to drive the kiddies to soccer practice. Workplace protections should be entirely employer choice. Vaccines, nice for old people. Viral theater, alive and well. And, oh, yes, medical news. Time to wind down. Women aged between 18 and 50 should not drink at all under shock World Health Organization plan. Why 18? Women these days, or girls these days, become capable of childbirth at the age of 10. And we read these stories of these women who, in their 50s, even over 60, giving birth to children. Look, this is based on a misapprehension. Yes, the great fear of fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome is associated with binge drinking. Having a couple of glasses of wine or even three glasses of wine is not binge drinking and is not going to harm the fetus. But let's just make everyone as unhappy as we can. Meanwhile, just keep smoking the dope, keep toking up, keep swallowing those high THC gummy bears, because there's, no problem with that. So let's move on to Theater Thursday, which is a documentary, and it is called Hitchcock Truffaut, and it is directed by Kent Jones, the well-known film curator, and it is written by him and by Serge Toubiana. I should explain that this is an old-fashioned documentary. That is to say, I suppose it's sort of an old-fashioned, new-fashioned documentary in the sense that there have been attempts to enliven the documentary form in recent years. The Kid Stays in the Picture, the very entertaining documentary about Robert Evans, would animate photographs. And if you look at the documentary Senna from 2010, which I highly recommend, what was new about that was basically telling the story through television footage of Ayrton Senna's racing career. What you have in this documentary is you have pictures and audio of Francois Truffaut interviewing Alfred Hitchcock. You have talking heads, lots and lots of talking heads. I'm not all that fond of the talking heads presentation style of documentary. The difference here is that these are all filmmakers that are being interviewed, and they're sharing their passion for the films of Alfred Hitchcock. And since they are directors themselves, they have a certain insight into technical expertise, which makes this rather invaluable, I must say. Of course, Alfred Hitchcock is perhaps the greatest ever best-known American filmmaker. Of course, he was English and only came to America in the late 1930s. His films continue to live on. They've been brought out in many editions and in fine-looking Blu-rays. And they're influential. They remain influential. Francois Truffaut, as is pointed out in the documentary, was a very different man than Hitchcock. Truffaut was born in 1932. Hitchcock was born in 1899. Hitchcock, his father was a greengrocer, had a very sort of bourgeois upbringing, very concerned with respectability. Truffaut was a juvenile delinquent whose own father took him to a prison, a juvenile reformatory, when he discovered crimes that he had been committing. The documentary points out that Hitchcock is understood to be a formalist, whereas Truffaut, far more experimental in his films. He explains to Hitchcock that he would often have dinner with actors in his films, and he would take notes or reconstruct notes and then write scenes based on conversations that he'd had on the actors, and including using the words that they had spoken. And Hitchcock was rather taken aback by this. He said, "Does this mean that you have to write through the night?" And Truffaut said that yes, that he frequently did that. You see that this would somewhat horrified Hitchcock because this is really sort of, by the seat of your pants of filmmaking. That Hitchcock worked with scripts. There was little or no improvisation in his films. Hitchcock famously called actors cattle, or sometimes he said they should be treated as cattle. There is an amusing section in Hitchcock Truffaut where Hitchcock explains his irritation, with method actors, specifically in this case Montgomery Clift, who starred in Hitchcock's little known film about a Catholic priest. It was shot on location in Quebec City. It's a very, very handsome film. I confess it's called. So Hitchcock says in the documentary that his artistry is entirely visual. And so he wanted to make a link, a segue, between the scene where Montgomery Clift comes out of the courthouse and to where the next venue is going to be, which is a hotel across the street. So the script had Hitchcock, Montgomery Clift looking up with those famous eyes of his, and then we have a cutaway to the hotel. And Clift says that he didn't want to do it. Why not? Well, maybe I wouldn't look up to the hotel. Well, why wouldn't you? Well, maybe I would be looking at the crowd. And, Hitchcock had to tell him, this is what I want. I'm not interested in doing what you want. I'm interested in doing what I want. And Hitchcock's films, with rare exceptions, were meticulously storyboarded before production. That Hitchcock knew in his head the shots that he wanted. And in fact, he pretty much edited in his head. And he found this very useful later in disputes with studios because there was very little excess footage. Now, typically, when studios interfere, They say things like, "Oh, I don't like this scene, replace it with this scene." And with Hitchcock's films, that was almost impossible. This film, as I've mentioned previously, is rather an audiovisual gloss on one of the most famous books about cinema, which is called Hitchcock Truffaut. And this book was written in 1966 and was later revised by Truffaut shortly before his early death at the age of 1952. And it's different from most books about film because it is about technique more than anything else. Filmmaking technique. Why did you choose to shoot this scene in this manner, for example? And that is the kind of stuff that you don't really get from most books about film. You get a lot of talk about acting, or you get a lot of talk about, I don't know, social content or politics and the like. And well, Hitchcock had very little interest in politics. And I suppose you could say that he was somewhat subversive about this. In Hitchcock's film Notorious, with Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant, which I find rather morally repugnant, in that Ingrid Bergman is bullied into, she's prostituted to a neo-Nazi in South America. And because her father was associated with the German-American Bund. It's all pretty terrible stuff. But Claude Rains, who plays the German, is quite a genial character and arguably a much more likable person than Cary Grant. We find there is not very much biographical information in this film, which comes in at an economical 80 minutes. I would have liked to have heard more about Hitchcock's years in Germany, working with Murnau and others. But no, this the book Hitchcock Truffaut is about the movies. A complaint that I would have is, let's say, because of the brevity of this film, there are a lot of Hitchcock films that don't get a look in, and it's really rather a shame. Now, of course, in a film about Hitchcock, you're going to have a lot of attention paid to Psycho and to Vertigo and to Rear Window, say. But I would have liked to have heard more about sort of failed experiment by Hitchcock, or continuous takes, Rope, for instance, or films that he made which were, say, less morally serious than others, such as To Catch a Thief, which is really an extraordinarily beautiful film visually. There's a lot of talk about guilt and suffering in the documentary because Hitchcock, is one of the, I should mention the people who are interviewed in the film, and is quite an impressive group of people. There is Wes Anderson, Olivier Assayas, Peter Bogdanovich, Arnaud Desplechin, David Fincher, James Gray, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Richard Linklater, Paul Schrader, and Martin Scorsese. Hitchcock was a Catholic, and Truffaut brings this up in the documentary. Truffaut says, I don't think that someone who wasn't a Catholic could have made a film like The Wrong Man. The Wrong Man stars Henry Fonda. It came out in 1956. It is based on a true story of mistaken identity, and it is an absolutely harrowing film. But, the question is brought up, so you are not guilty of this robbery, but you have committed other crimes. Yes, that's true. And there's a well-known phenomenon of people confessing to crimes that they have not committed, I suppose because of a generalized feeling of guilt. But so often in Hitchcock's films, the wrong man theme leads to a projection of guilt onto a man who shouldn't feel guilty from the man who should feel guilty because he has committed the crime. Of course, as we all know, and I believe that the book begins with this, that there's a famous story about Hitchcock. When he was 5 or 6 years old, he had displeased his father, and his father wrote out a note and told him to walk to the closest police department and hand it to a policeman. And what the note says was that I have been a bad boy, and you should put me in a cell, for 5 minutes. And Hitchcock, well, he never forgot this. It's rather memorable, And it left him with a lifelong fear of the police. Of course, defenders of the police and the justice system generally will say, well, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. As we know, that is not, in fact, a rule, an absolute rule. I was very impressed with many of the observations made by the directors, particularly James Gray, I believe it was, who is talking about a very famous scene in Vertigo, where, as you know, an elaborate and preposterous murder plan has been conceived by an old friend of James Stewart, who plays a policeman who is no longer a policeman because of the death of another policeman in a chase, and Stewart suffers from vertigo, a fear of heights. And so supposedly this man's wife, this rich man's wife, has come to the belief that she is the reincarnation of a woman called Carlotta, who lived in the grand old San Francisco days. And Hitchcock's camera and Jimmy Stewart follow her through the streets of San Francisco and out beyond San Francisco, and she ends up at the Palace of the Legion of Honor, a fine building, which is an art museum. And we see her staring intently for a long time at this portrait of Carlotta. And we see Jimmy Stewart, looking at the portrait, can see that this poor woman, played by Kim Novak, has apparently succumbed to this insanity, that she is a woman from the past, 100 years ago, say. And we see him staring at the portrait, where he sees the configuration of hair, the little bun, circular bun on the back of her hair. And then we see that Kim Novak has the exact same circular bun at the back. Now, the filmmaker that I just mentioned, James Gray, said, well, what about Kim Novak's look? Isn't that important? What is she feeling when she's looking at this portrait? Well, she's not feeling anything, because it's bullshit, because it's all fake. What's interesting is this obsession that Jimmy Stewart has conceived for this seemingly mad woman. And he confesses, he says that Hitchcock, never took any coverage from the front. And he says, I would have probably done that. It just gives you, it just demonstrates Hitchcock's audacity. We don't need to see what Kim Novak is looking at. We're only interested in Jimmy Stewart in this scene. That the Carlotta character, the pseudo Carlotta, is really kind of a device to move the plot forward. We get a lot of, acting and feeling from Kim Novak later in Vertigo. And I'll just say, one of the commentators said that, of course, Vera Miles was cast to play the Carlotta character, and she got pregnant, and so it had to be recast. And I think it was Scorsese who said that, well, this worked out well, because I don't think that Hitchcock could have got as much out of Vera Miles as he got out of Kim Novak. It's a very strange performance, because we find out that Kim Novak's character is she's a simple shop girl, a rather vulgar character. And, well, sexually, she's been around the block. And, she lets us know this. She's a very erotic character in the way that Carlotta isn't. But here we have, in the first half of the movie, we find a woman who is not particularly intelligent and not particularly elegant, playing a woman who is both intelligent and elegant. And normally it works the other way around. You don't go from lower to higher, you go from higher to lower. Scorsese has a really great description. Well, we hear it from Truffaut as well. Hitchcock indulges in some vulgarity regarding the famous scene in Kim Novak's hotel room where this eerie green light is suffusing the room. And he has, I once joked, there was a meme on Twitter, describe a movie's plot in 5 years, and you can do that with Vertigo. I'll pay for your makeover. He is determined. He meets a woman who looks a lot like Carlotta, who is no longer with us. And so he becomes obsessed with this woman because he feels guilt over the death of Carlotta, or the pseudo Carlotta. And he gets this crazy idea in his head that he's going to turn her into Carlotta because, of course, it's quite audacious as well. We have the first fake woman, and then we have the second fake woman, and they're all the same woman. So he buys her these expensive clothes and has her made up and has her hair dyed blonde, very blonde. And the hair is done in a special way. It's supposed to be pinned up in the back. And she won't do it. She thinks it's going too far. And Jimmy Stewart is begging her to do it, saying that, I will love you then, which is a crazy way to talk. And so she goes into the bathroom to do this, and he sits by the window, and Hitchcock says that her refusal to take the final step in the makeover is like a woman who strips down but doesn't remove her knickers, that this has a very strong sexual association to Jimmy Stewart. And of course, the use of the Coit Tower in Vertigo, an obvious phallic symbol. Hitchcock loved those kinds of gags. Now, I suppose one of the critics that I saw commented that one of the things that we usually hear about in a discussion of Hitchcock is Hitchcock's fondness for icy blondes. Well, I would have liked some discussion about that because it is so prevalent in his films that, how can you not talk about it? Vertigo is a film about male idealism in the same way that Rear Window is a film about male idealism. And you can see a sequence of movies, Rear Window, Vertigo, and then Marnie, where this male idealism becomes increasingly curdled and toxic. That in Rear Window, Grace Kelly is the most beautiful woman in the world. And she's kind and thoughtful, and she's besotted with Jimmy Stewart. He's not interested. Why? Because she's a socialite, and he's a photographer and travels all over the world and lives in, unsalubrious locations, and he doesn't think that she's up to the challenge. So, of course, in Rear Window, we find Grace Kelly actually proving that she is up to the challenge. But yes, the icy blonde that in the book, Hitchcock Truffaut, Hitchcock talks about casting, and he came to the conclusion that Priscilla Lane was the wrong choice for the icy blonde in Saboteur. And I resisted this at first, and then I realized that Hitchcock was right, because Priscilla Lane, of course, begins the movie as the enemy of Robert Cummings, who has been, unjustly accused, and she is effectively his, keeping him imprisoned or the like, or under lock and key. But the problem with Priscilla Lane is that she lacks a certain hardness in her look. such that when you first see her in Saboteur, well, all the men are going to fall in love with her. I know I certainly did. I noticed that with Truffaut, he wrote about the Icy Blonde, and he mentioned Frenzy. And I thought that he made a mistake. He said that the Icy Blonde in Frenzy wasn't up to snuff, and I think that's a very rare error because of all of Hitchcock's Icy Blondes. Billy Whitelaw in Frenzy was the iciest, certainly icy enough to excite Morrissey's admiration. You can see stills of Billy Whitelaw on two of the Smiths singles or EPs. A very long discussion of the movie Psycho, as one would expect, because Psycho was such a revolutionary movie, revolutionary in so many different ways. I mean, this isn't an original observation by me, but it is the greatest head fake in movie history. Because you think that this movie is going to be, the tawdry tale of Janet Leigh's theft and adultery. But of course, it is about something completely different. And, okay, so you're going to hire Janet Leigh to be the lead in your film, and you're going to kill her off after 40 minutes? Who does that? That's the reason why the Psycho was so shocking. It was not merely the manner of Janet Leigh's murder, but the fact that Hitchcock was killing off Janet Leigh. And Scorsese is very perceptive in the sense that he mentions that in the first half of the movie, the star of the movie is really Janet Leigh's bra, or her bras to be more exact, because she has a white bra and a black bra. And you see, this may seem, subtle or obvious. Okay, so this is a movie about sex at the beginning. Well, the second half of the movie is about perverted sex. But so we have a hunky John Gavin and Janet Leigh, making out in the bed, and presumably, we've come upon them after they've had sex. And Janet Leigh famously had big breasts, and so there she is in this iconic white bra, and later we see her in this iconic black bra, and it's reinforcing the message that this film is about Janet Leigh's sexuality. And of course, it's not really. It's not at all, which comes as such a tremendous shock to the audience. There's a great deal of technical talk about how many setups were used for the shower scene. I'm amused to note that there are books about Alfred Hitchcock have become such a cottage industry, such a genre, that there is actually a monograph about Marley Renfro, who was the nude model who served as Janet Leigh's stand-in in the shower scene in Psycho. Not, when I say stand-in, not that Janet Leigh wasn't, standing in the bathtub, because she was, but, on a movie set, there are certain adjustments that need to be made or whatever, and you don't want Janet Leigh to be spending all day under a shower head when that is not necessary. I'll just mention briefly the Blu-ray of this. It comes with really good extras. There is a Q&A, Kent Jones with Noah Baumbach, a short about Notorious. These are all in 1080p. A short interview about Hitchcock by Peter Bogdanovich, and Rope. They deal with Rope in the extras. It's Rope is a strange film, William Goldman made the argument that this book, Hitchcock Truffaut, ruined Hitchcock because it made him self-conscious. That Hitchcock confesses to Truffaut that he had become quite concerned with the question of whether his films had been over formalist, whether he should have experimented more and perhaps tried a looser approach. And you see in Hitchcock's films of the 1960s that after Psycho and the Birds, we get Marnie, which it has its attractions. It's certainly not up to Vertigo or Rear Window. One of the reasons, I think, is because Tippi Hedren is not top blonde. And then we get Torn Curtain, which really doesn't work very well, despite the fact that Hitchcock was one of the richest men in Hollywood, that the success of Psycho had led to him being Universal's third largest shareholder. He's still being bullied around by the studio. And so they forced him to cast Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. And Paul Newman was a method actor, and he greatly irritated Hitchcock. What's my motivation? Yes, they really said things like that. And Hitchcock famously said, your salary. As well, this is supposed to be, a love match, Newman and Andrews, and they didn't get along. The next movie, Topaz, it's not all that good either, actually. That Hitchcock in that film went with the international actors. Now, Hitchcock is certainly back on form in Frenzy in 1972, and there's a great discussion of the fetishism of objects in Hitchcock's film. A close-up on a woman's handbag, or a key, or a pin, or a brooch. And, well, what does that mean? Why is it important? Well, I guess it's important because he is showing it. Although the brooch in Frenzy on one of the women who is raped and murdered later makes a really important rear appearance in the film, in a scene which is it's both funny and macabre, which was the Hitchcock ideal. This film could have gone on and on and on. 80 minutes. There's an advantage, to a film being that short. There's no end of material about Hitchcock. But again, what you get from Hitchcock Truffaut, both the book and the movie, is an explanation of technique. The view from above, the omniscient view, the God-like view. Very powerful. Hitchcock explains a famous scene of a explosion and fire in The Birds as he just wanted to give the big picture and not be forced to take a lot of shots with people with fire hoses trying to put out a fire. But of course, one does not look at the world that way. One just typically does not look at the world from a great height looking down, and it is disconcerting, it is disorienting, and it suggests a otherworldly look, the God's eye look. I really enjoyed this film, and of course it's the kind of film that you can watch over and over again. I'll just say David Fincher, several of whose films I've liked, and several of whose films I absolutely detest. He's really good in this. Whatever you think about him, the products of his filmmaking, he knows it inside out, and he's given a lot of thought to the technique. So, highly recommended by me. And let's take a final look at the chat. My Trail of Disgrace says, though it's considered minor, a frothy comedy, family plot is one of my favorites. It is a great cast. Hitchcock, of course, Bruce Dern had been in Alfred Hitchcock's Presents, and he had a small role in Marnie, but he has a major role in Family Plot, and there's a scene where he's attempting to control a sabotaged Ford Mustang that's going down a hill. And Dern, he yells out, I just got to do something with this car. I can't control the car. And Hitchcock laughed and laughed. He thought he was hilarious. I thought Barbara Harris is really good in Family Plot as well. I love Robert Cummings as the anthropologist in Beach Party, says My Trail of Disgrace. Anman says, but Billy Whitelaw's character in Frenzy isn't interested at all in the leading man. She is the wife of a friend who doesn't like the lead. Does this really count as a Hitchcock icy blonde? Well, she does, because, she stands in the way of what John Finch wants. She is just such an imperious presence that, oh, I'm your old, Air Force buddy, and I'm going to help you out. And you just get one look from this woman, and no, sorry, pal, I can't do that. You know how it is. Yes, the train going into the tunnel at the end of North by Northwest is another of those. There's a discussion of plausibility in the documentary, and Hitchcock didn't like what he called the plausibles, those who insisted on plausibility for its own sake. I mean, again, Vertigo's plot is absolutely ridiculous, just absolutely ridiculous, but it works because it's more like a dream or a nightmare than any kind of depiction of reality. You could say the same thing of North by Northwest. How are you going to kill a man? What, lure him into a cornfield and shoot him down with a crop duster? There are many easier ways to kill a man. But what is North by Northwest about? Well, it's about the male belief that no man can call himself a man unless he has tested himself against adversity. And we see that Cary Grant's character in North by Northwest has never had to test himself against adversity. And in the course of the movie, it's just one thing after another that is thrown at him. And of course, he finds something, he finds a woman, Eva Marie Saint, who is worthy of his effort. Vertigo is not a fear of heights, says Laponius Maximus Meridius. No, it's a condition that stems from a fear of heights. Lena Dunham made us, okay. Okay, so what does KMG think of Blake Edwards' SOB? I don't like it. Something happened to that man. If you see Peter Gunn, or you see the Pink Panther, A Shot in the Dark, and then his movies get bad. They just get bad. And who would want to hire John Ritter for anything? Yikes. Hitchcock despised black pepper, says Don Willis. I didn't know that, though. There are collections of Hitchcock. What Universal has put out a collection which comes originally in a handsome, like a coffee table book with little slots for the Blu-rays, and a nice booklet. But there's all sorts of collections. And yes, he was very, very prolific. There were some. I just mentioned this film Lifeboat. I mentioned that Hitchcock didn't have much interest in politics, and this Lifeboat is preposterous. It's about survivors of a sinking in a small boat in the North Atlantic. Now, I don't really have a problem with implausibility, but one cannot get much more grittily real than being stranded in a small boat in the North Atlantic. And I don't know, other things. It's sort of a lampoon or warning against the German Übermensch, that we have the German who's, pretending to be something else, Walter Slezak, and his secret weapon is amphetamine. And apparently, if you can keep on taking amphetamine, you never have to go to sleep. Well, of course, that's not true. What would have been interesting in that context is that if you go without sleep for any length of time, any number of, days or weeks, and, insomniacs know this, and I have some personal experience, your perception of reality becomes warped. It's kind of a hallucinatory quality when you find yourself that you can't sleep. That would be an interesting idea for a film. I think. Of course, when you look at Notorious, which was made in 1946, the Nazis are still the problem. Of course, this film was written by Ben Hecht, which kind of explains it. Was there any other ideology that represented a threat to the world in 1946? International communism? But no, you don't watch Hitchcock's films for politics. And Three's Company was hilarious, says Palcasso88. Don't tempt me. Okay, so that's it for today. And what are we talking about next week on Theater Thursday? We're talking about a Japanese film, a great classic from 1953 called Yugetsu by Kenji Mizoguchi. And a week after that, on July the 1st, which is generic National Holiday Day for Canada, I will be discussing Billy Wilder's somewhat scandalous 1964 farce, Kiss Me Stupid. On the book club tomorrow, I will be discussing a dystopian novel about the search for, transhumanism, eternal life. It's called Immortal Life by Stanley Bing, and it's really quite good. On June 25th, a memoir, a military memoir by Peter Kemp called No Colors or Crest. And on July the 2nd, my birthday, we're going to be discussing Desmond Morton's A Short History of Canada. So I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, which would really hit the spot right now because I'm kind of up against it. Well, I'm really up against it. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Thank you so much to people who have contributed. I love you all. If you are in Canada, you can donate money to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.